Everyone has this certain vision of girls or women who have sex with others for money. Most people call them prostitutes, hookers, etc. They vision them as girls who wear high heels and short skirts or dresses, have big breasts popping out of their shirt too small for them, and claim a messy hairstyle. They also are stereotyped to be out on the streets at all hours of the night looking for men who claim to have lots of money or not to have sex with them in a place of the man's choosing. Stereotypically, after they are picked up by these men off the streets, the men take them to a place that he considers safe. In this space, a woman may not know where she is at all. The men who pick them up can do whatever they want to them considering they are paying for this. These men can hurt them physically, sending the girls home with less money than promised at the beginning because they weren't good enough or fun enough, with bruises all over their body that girls have to hide the next day. While the violence does happen quite a lot, these girls that should be professionally called sex workers are actually not as terrible as everyone sets them out to be. They are human beings who are desperate for money because they have to pay rent, electricity, and all of these other bills just like everyone else. A lot of sex workers wouldn't even be doing this work if they weren't desperate enough. I personally thought the same thing about these girls up until recently when I watched a TEDx talk. Sex worker Juno Mack spoke in this TEDx talk back in 2016. I placed a link to this TEDx talk on the handout I have made. I couldn't believe Juno Mack was a sex worker at first because she was dressed very professionally and spoke like she was very educated. She went against pretty much all stereotypes of a prostitute. You might be wondering what Juno Mack was talking about during her TEDx talk, and I'll tell you. She was talking about 4 legal models that address the sex industry and how they don't work. These 4 legal models are full criminalization, which is criminalizing everyone involved, partial criminalization, which is allowing sex work as long as it's done behind closed doors, the Swedish Nordic model, which means ending the demand for sex, and legalization, which means sex work can only happen in certain areas and venues. None of these approaches work because they all cause harm or no changes, and the government still pushes these all over the world. But Mack asked a very important question. What do sex workers want? Matt continued by saying that the only thing that will help sex workers be in a safe working environment is decriminalization and self-determination. Decriminalization and legalization are not the same thing. Decriminalization instead means removing all laws targeting the sex work industry and instead treating sex work much like any other type of work. This helps create a safe environment that sex workers want because there are so many safety laws regarding regular work. Something that helps this idea is the Red Umbrella Project. The Red Umbrella Project, or RUP, funds and promotes the rights of sex workers all around the world. Their mission statement is, and I quote, to strengthen the sex workers' rights movement and its sustainability by catalyzing new funding. They do so much work for sex workers globally that it's impressive. They actually have a theory of change that they go by. The main point of this theory of change is that sex work needs to be seen as work so they can have the same rights and safe working conditions as other jobs. How this theory of change works is beginning with RUP's mission. From there, you branch off to how RUP contributes to the mission, which is grants, the core funding and peer capacity building support, technical support, resource mobilization, and donor advocacy. Then you move up to where these things will happen and who will make them happen. The sex workers' rights movement helps with the grants and technical support. The sex workers' rights movement also connects to who will help make the resource mobilization and donor advocacy happen with its allies, which is allies. When you move up to where change must happen with advocacy, the sex workers' rights movement can help change the government, which includes laws, policies, enforcement, legal system, etc., service providers, and the public's opinion. Allies can also help change these things. With these changes, this means rights, respect, and justice for sex workers, which leads to the change we want to see, which is societies upholding and respecting the health, human, and labor rights and self-determination of sex workers of all genders. There are always roadblocks that get in the way of these tactics of decriminalization and theory of change. Donald Trump recently signed a bill called Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act, or FOSTA, / Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act, or SESTA. With this new bill, certain sites such as Craigslist and Backpage will lose the right to allow sex workers to do their work and personal background checks on men because the sites will no longer have that freedom. Craigslist has already shut down their entire personal section where women and men found sex work. With this bill, Trump has cut off the safe working conditions for sex workers. They can't check on Backpage or Craigslist for information regarding a man or woman who is abusive. Their work isn't seen as work, so the administration doesn't listen to them and seizes the site Backpage and forces Craigslist to shut down their personal section. Once this bill was signed, there were a variety of protests. In May 2018, sex workers and their supporters held a protest called Funeral for the Death of Sex Work. Later in the June of that same year, they organized the first ever National Sex Worker Lobby Day. This was basically a protest for sex workers' rights as well, because sex workers from all around the world were talking about how Sesta Fossa was harmful for sex workers' environment. In one video that I included on the handout, which is the very first link, included some people's voices from this day in June 2018. Darby Hickey said these bills are directly putting sex workers' lives in danger. Tamika Spellman said that these laws do more harm than good. T.S. Jane mentioned that it is now difficult for sex workers who are looking for new clients to see if these potential clients are on the bad date list, which is a website where sex workers could tell other sex workers about a client that was abusive or harmful, or otherwise known as a bad date. The National Sex Worker Lobby Day actually turned into International Sex Workers Day, or also known as International Whores Day, because it reached sex workers all around the world. The tactics that sex workers have used have been very effective. They have had no violent protests or protests that were nonviolent that have turned violent. The strategies that they are using help get the point across, with no one getting hurt, which is exactly what they intend to do. They use the trifecta method, which is unity, planning, and discipline. The sex workers are unified and have the numbers. They plan their protest out to help prevent violence, and with that plan in mind, they know that they have to remain nonviolent to help their own selves as well. Those who obey the leaders of the protest of movement have habit, fear sanctions, moral obligation, self-interest, psychological identification with the rulers, indifference, or the absence of self-confidence among subjects. This is both a good and bad thing, but at least they have the attitude to obey the right leader and not, let's say, Trump. Overall, I have learned that civil resistance is the way to go for sure. One, nobody gets hurt. Two, the sex workers' rights movement have definitely been on a good run so far, even if they are just starting out. They haven't had any violent protests, and that's something that other movements should look up to. Lastly, it's the obvious way to go. Civil resistance can help movements achieve their mission, and that's something everyone's got to learn at some point in their life. Thank you.